First 15 years in the sport, I was high carb athlete. I was pushing a lot of carbs per day, the typical 60% plus carbohydrate diet. And in 2015, I definitely had some health issues. It ended up being candida issues like yeast overgrowth in the GI tract. I got to the point where I was pretty desperate at the end of the season of 2015. I started doing some research online, and I came across that I needed to starve the candida because it was a yeast. It needed to be starved of sugar. So we just immediately started cutting things out. I called Zach Bitter. I kind of started talking to him, and he actually put me in contact with you, and that's how we were introduced. And we started, chatting, and you kind of mentored me in the direction I started reading. At the time, you had before you redesigned your website, and you had a really robust resources area on fat adaptation. And when I got a hold of okay, this could possibly help with performance, and it put the candida in remission right away. So it worked, man. The first 2 weeks in, I was I had no problems. I wasn't having any kind of symptoms anymore.
What about the first couple of days?
The first couple of days sucked.
We don't want to lie to people about this.
No, and I have to say that if you've been on a high carb diet and all of a sudden and your body's only looking for that glucose pathway, all of a sudden you starve it of glucose. It takes 2 or 3 weeks to really kick that fat metabolism on, right? That's kind of our dormant pathway from our hunter-gatherer days and our seasonal eating days. And
but it's substance withdrawal for the carb addict.
Yeah, it really is. It is a withdrawal. And so I felt pretty gnarly for about 10 days. In hindsight, day 8 to 10, I started to come out of that haze a little bit. And I noticed hey, I'm starting to have sustained energy during the day, where I wasn't having those afternoon crashes where I was looking for, a bagel or something. And I really, really did start to see. The only thing I had, because of the candida issue, I was actively training for HURT 100. So I was 7 weeks out when I started cutting carbs out. And so I went pretty hardcore. I did some really bad 3, 4 hour, 5 hour long runs with hardly any calories. And I was trying to eat, at the time I was trying to eat fat because I was trying to still starve the candida, right? So I was trying to manage that and do long runs. And of course, eating fat on a long run doesn't work very well. And so I, but then after 4 weeks in, I really started to feel better. And that's when we started bringing back just a small IV drip of carb calories, just in liquid form. I think at the time I was using Goo Roctane or something, but it was
Goo Brew, I think, at that point in time.
Yeah, it probably was Goo Brew back then. And I was using that, and then I felt good. That and S-caps, and I kept it pretty low. I went really low on my calories per hour because of the candida, right? I didn't want to overload my system with sugar even on once a week on long runs. So I was doing a lot of fasted. I was doing some fasted morning runs. I was doing some 2 to 2.5, 3 hour runs on just Vespa and water and S-caps. And so I started playing around with Vespa at that time as well, and was really having great workouts. 4 or 5 weeks in, I was feeling great. I was cause I had tried, in the early days before this happened, go back to 2012, 2013, those times when you were getting rumors of Tony Kaprichka and some of those guys, those young guys on the scene were going on hardly any gels. They're taking 2 gels on a 25-mile run. And I was I tried to go out and do a 2-hour run. I remember a couple of times trying to go out and do it when I was a carb athlete, trying to go say, okay, I want to try to, burn fat at a little higher rate and encourage my fat metabolism. This was early days before I even talked to you, but I had heard about them doing that. And
that's when Bob Seebohar was pushing the metabolic flexibility program.
And so I went out and tried to run a few runs 2 hours, and I was cratering at an hour and a half. My body was hey, I need carbs now. Or, I remember walking home from a couple of workouts, or jogging really, really slow and feeling like crap and going home and laying on the floor and asking my wife, get me a banana, and I'm bonking really bad. And so so I had that experience, and then all of a sudden now I'm running, 2.5, 3 hours and doing a strong finish and feeling great on just like a vest with CV25 before the 2-hour run, and stuff like that. And just S caps and water. And so feeling awesome. And I really was like, but I was still apprehensive going into that first race, Hurt 100 in 2016. So January, this would have been mid-January of 2016. And I went there with a ton of gels because I used to do about 300 to 400 calories an hour push of gel per hour. I would do 65 to 75 gels in a 100 miler. And I think the most I ever did was like 75. And so I went there with like all these gels and all my drop bags. My crew had them, but I was planning on doing like, max 200 calories per hour. But I had this as a backup plan because I'd never raced on OFM. And I was nervous about it. I have to admit, I was very, very nervous. So Jesse is like crewing for me, and he had crewed for me before at San Diego 100. And so we were friends, and he knew what I looked like. And when I showed up in Hawaii, he was like, dude, what did you do? Because I had changed. Like I was leaner. I was, I had lost, I was way more ripped just because I'd lost extra weight. I didn't have all that. I didn't have the carb water weight, that you have on a high carb diet. And I was way leaner, and I was having trouble, I have to say, at 44 at that time, I was having trouble getting down to my race weight in doing the things I used to do. Where I used to get down, you fluctuate a lot when you're on a high carb diet, especially the older you get. Like if you're not in big volume, you're going to gain 5-6 pounds, and then you're going to drop it again right when you're in big volume training right before the race. But I was having trouble getting down to my original lean body weight that I used to be able to race at. And so, but all of a sudden I went below that. I was like below that as far as weight goes. And I looked different too. I had to buy all new jeans, everything. My waist size went down 3 inches during that time. I got down to like my high school lean weight. And so anyway, after that experience, I think I did less than 22 hours. I did like maybe 2,500 calories or something. And I didn't do very many calories at all. And it worked.
You were in the race.
And I won the race, and I felt great. And even afterwards, I think this still like stands out to me more than anything. And I kind of want to talk on a little rabbit trail here about this in a second, but because this is my own theory, and I don't know if I have anything to fully back it up, but one of the things that I noticed was the recovery afterwards, because I had at that point 2,200s under my belt, finishes, quite a few wins, and I was always inflamed after the race, like just swollen cankles, like swollen knees, achy knees. I had to wear compression, and I had to sleep in compression because I ballooned up. I was eating a ton of carbs, during that time, and so I was burning only glucose, as a fuel substrate during my old self was. And then all of a sudden I'm getting done with this race, and I hardly have any swelling. Like I am, because we go to the post race, party, Hurt has a really cool party on Monday night. The race is on Saturday morning, starts on Saturday morning. I finished on Sunday morning, like 3 a.m. And then on Monday evening, there's a party. Well, normally I would be super inflamed still and like limping around, and everyone else was, but I was like, oh my gosh, I feel great. I was doing air squats and burpees, on Monday, and I was feeling great. I was taking pictures of my ankles and my knees and texting it to my wife and being like, oh my gosh, look at, I'm not even swollen and I'm not even sore, And so that was like a really cool moment for me. Like that the recovery was like huge, like the recovery bit. And I've seen that in all the OFM athletes we've coached over the years now, it's the same feedback, especially if they have hundreds or 200s or like the inflammation after a race. They're always like, oh gosh, like I'm like back in half the time I used to be, and so that's consistent across the board, right?